Becca with the Gwinnett County Public Library, and I present to you Baking with Becca, our first virtual baking program series here at the Gwinnett County Public Library. For our first episode, we're going to be making rosemary Parmesan bread. I know bread can seem super intimidating for beginner bakers, but don't worry, this bread is a really easy one to try out if you're new to the game. I'll show you my tips, tricks, and methods that I use, and I'll also provide you with a recipe so that you can do it at any time you wish, and try it again if you like it. So, without further ado, let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. What I have in front of me here is all of our recipe ingredients measured and ready to go. So I'm practicing what is known in the culinary world as mise en place, which is just a French translation to everything in its place. It's very popular in the culinary world, and this is just to ensure that everybody has all of their ingredients ready to go ahead of time. They're pre-measured, and you have the best chance of getting them into the recipe correctly when you do this ahead of time, so you're not scrambling at the last second to get it all together. First things first, for any bread recipe, you're going to need some leavener, and a leavening agent is what helps it rise. So today we're using active dry yeast, which everybody can find in their local grocery store in the baking aisle. Very easy. Next, we're going to need room temperature water to help that yeast rise. Yeast loves a warm environment, and that's why we're using room temp water. We're going to use sugar in our recipe today, and that's not to make it sweet. This is a savory loaf, but yeast loves sugar. It's its favorite meal. So we add sugar to that so the yeast can feed off of it and create lovely little air bubbles in our dough and ultimately in our finished loaf as well. Next things next, olive oil. That's going to create a wonderful, fine textured, smooth crumb on our dough after we're done baking, and obviously just adds wonderful flavor as well. You need flour in any bread recipe. So today I'm just using unbleached all-purpose flour. And then for our flavor components in this recipe, for any kind of bread, sweet or savory, you're always going to need salt. So we're going to put salt in our recipe, and then we've got fresh chopped rosemary and also freshly grated Parmesan. So those are going to make it nice and flavorful, and this is going to be a bread to die for. So we're going to get ready to combine all of those ingredients in our mixer. Alright, so into the bowl of our stand mixer is going to be 1 1/4 cups of water. And that's room temperature water. Like I said, that's going to help the yeast rise. Our active dry yeast goes in next. And to add to that, to help that yeast bloom, is going to be our 2 teaspoons of sugar. And that's so that yeast can get a nice feed off of that. So after combining our water, our yeast, and our sugar into our mixing bowl, we're going to allow that to sit for about 5 minutes or so, and this is to do something called blooming. This gives our yeast a chance to start breaking down those granules, which will make it more activated in our recipe and will help our bread dough rise just a little bit better. We'll check back in 5 minutes. Alright, so we now have 3 1/2 cups of flour added to our mixing bowl, about 1.5 tablespoons of rosemary, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and 1.5 teaspoons of our salt. Make sure to set aside 1/2 tablespoon of rosemary to add to the top of our loaf to finish it off for the end. We're going to go ahead and give this a mix on medium speed for about 4 to 5 minutes until we get a nice elastic dough that comes away from the sides. So I'll check back with you once I have that done, and we'll see you soon. Alright, so I'm about 1.5 minutes into our mixing here, and the dough is a little bit clumpy, but don't worry, it's going to come together. I'm going to go ahead now and add our fresh grated Parmesan here to our dough, and we'll continue mixing for about 3.5 more minutes or so. We're looking for a nice elastic dough. Okie dokie, everybody, so we finished mixing our dough, and now it's time to let it rise for our first rise of our bake. So your dough should look nice and smooth like this. It should have come clean away from the sides of your bowl while you were mixing, and when you poke it, it should feel nice and soft, and your fingers should make an indent in the dough. So since we've got such a nice clean bowl and there is olive oil in our dough recipe, we're just going to let it sit in this bowl to rise. It's going to be easy to pull away once we are done rising. So don't worry about that. It's, stickiness is just a little bit of what comes with making bread. So we're going to let this rise for about 2.5 to 3 hours. The reason, it's such a big gap there is because It depends on the environment, really. If you've got your AC going and it's really cool in your house, it's probably going to take a little bit longer because yeast likes to grow in a warm environment. So if you live in a colder home, you can put it above your fridge. It's just a little bit warmer up there to let it rise. And or if you're already got a warm environment, that's cool too. So when I come back, I'll let you know how long mine was rising for today and what it should look like for that after that first rise. So I'm going to go ahead and just cover this with a tea towel like so, and we'll let that sit for about 2.5 to 3 hours. I'll check back soon. Welcome back, everybody. So it's been about 3 hours that I've let my dough rise, and as you can see, it has a nice dome top and it's doubled in size, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now that we've got that wonderful first rise done, we can go ahead and punch down our dough, and quite literally, we're just going to punch it down. So literally take your fist and punch it on in there. Just give it a few punches down, and you might be wondering why we're punching the dough down after we just waited 3 hours to get all that air in there. The reason we do a punch down is to prevent really large air bubbles from forming. So this just really lends us a nice even textured bread for our final product. So go ahead and get that turned out onto a lightly floured work surface like so, and we'll begin to do our shaping for our dough. So to get this out of the bowl, go ahead and just cup your hand around the side. Really, we're just working to pick up all the dough so that we don't do any waste. We don't like wasting here. And if you have a scraper, it makes it nice to get it out in one piece. That's even more helpful. So we've turned that out nice and even like. Try to keep it in one piece. That makes it really easy to work with. And from here, get a little bit of the dough bits off of your hand. And then go ahead and roll this over so that it's gently coated in flour on all sides. All right, so now we're gonna do the shaping of our loaf. So I prefer a loaf shape or a nice like long log shape, but you can also do a rounded bowl if you like. It's totally up to you. The most important part is when you're doing your shaping, you don't really need to work too heavily with the dough. You're just kind of gently rolling it and coercing it into whatever shape you like. Whatever you are doing, just make sure when you look at the bottom, you're gonna go ahead and look for any cracks in the dough and try and seal them. So if you have a circle, typically you're gonna end up with some cracks. All you need to do is just lift up the dough and seal them together so that they don't burst out while it bakes. So I have my log shaped here. I want it nice and even. I don't want too much tapering on the edges because I just want a nice even log loaf. So that looks good to me. It doesn't need to be perfect. It really doesn't. Bread baking is an art form all of its own. Each loaf is totally unique. So whatever you come up with is totally fine. Go ahead and grab just a plain old cookie sheet. You can line it with parchment paper like I've done here. I toss it with a little bit of flour and cornmeal. The cornmeal is nice for a little bit of separation between the pan and the dough, and also lends for a little bit of crunch on your final loaf of bread, which is really nice and pleasant. So go ahead and take your loaf and just gently lift it on up. Woo! And put it right on top of that cornmeal and flour. You might have to do a little bit of readjusting on it, like so. And then we are gonna cover that gently and leave it to rise for about another 1.5 to 2.5 hours. We're looking for a pretty big rise. It will stand out a little bit, totally fine. So I'll check with you when mine's done and we'll see how it looks. All right, everybody, so it's been about 2 hours that I've let my dough rise here. As you can see, it's expanded out a lot and it looks a little bit flat, but that's okay, don't worry about that. What I'm gonna do now is go ahead and give it a good brush with some melted butter. We're gonna just brush that whole surface of the bread here because this will lend to A, really good flavor, and B, it's going to help that crust get really nice and crackly on top. All right, and then, well, see, it actually is gonna help our Parmesan and rosemary that we're gonna top the bread with stick to the top a little bit too. So lots of bonuses there for the butter. And good, that's nicely covered, so we can go ahead and just sprinkle our leftover rosemary and our Parmesan on top, like so. Nice and easy, nothing fancy. Don't waste. All right, sometimes I just pat it down a little bit, help it stick down a little bit so there's no burnt Parmesan crispies. That should be good to go. And then we're gonna take a nice sharp knife, try to find the sharpest one that you have in your culinary reservoir, and we're just gonna slice a line straight down the center. This is called scoring, and it's a way for the air to escape from the loaf as it bakes instead of trying to burst out the sides. Sometimes you might see loaves that have little like blurbs on the side, and that just, it looks a little bit weird, and that's totally fine, but for a nice even looking loaf, you'd want to make the air holes, make an airline so that the air can escape the way you want it to. So I'm just gonna cut right down the center here. Sometimes you can do fancy stuff. You can cut on the side like so. Make it artistic. Really, it's its own thing. You want this air, a way for the air to escape on top. So slice it like so, and then we're gonna go into a preheated oven at 375 degrees for about 25 to 30 minutes until golden brown, and you can tap it on the bottom of the loaf of bread with an oven mitt on, of course, and it makes a hollow knocking sound. So we're gonna go into the oven with this bread. Did you know that another reason that we want to score bread on top when it's going into the oven is in medieval times, a way for different families to identify their breads in the communal ovens that they shared was by scoring a different pattern on top. Each family had their own. So, fun fact about medieval baking. Okay, so I pulled our loaf of bread out of the oven at about 27 minutes or so. For me, it was a little under 30 this time. I'm gonna go ahead and do the tap test to see if it sounds hollow and is done for sure. So just flip it on over, careful not to burn yourself, and then I think that sounds done to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and move that over to a cooling rack just to prevent the crust from getting soggy when it sits on a flat surface like that. And you're gonna wanna wait about 15 to 20 minutes before you slice into it. I know it's super hard to wait, but when you slice into it too early, it can release the steam and it can ruin the texture inside the bread. So try and wait if you can. I get it if you can. So either way, here we go. We're gonna see what it looks like when we slice in about 20 minutes or so. And our bread's done, yay! Okay, so I waited about 20 minutes or so before I cut into it so I didn't ruin the texture inside. And look at those lovely little air holes. They're not too big, which means that the rising on it was just right. And it's a little bit flat, but that's okay. In this case, I think with this bread recipe, it might have just spread out a little bit, so it might need some containment as it rises instead of just doing it on a sheet pan. We all learn things every time we bake something new. So a method that I can do for that is go ahead and grab a loaf pan or something like a rectangular Tupperware instead next time, and I'll go ahead and just put a tea towel in like that, coat it with some flour, and I'll rise my dough in there instead so it can keep that shape and rise up instead of out. That'll be a nice method for me. We'll see how it works next time. But for now, I'm going to enjoy this lovely, tasty rosemary Parmesan bread. Thanks for watching.